This is the magicwordpodcast.com.
Hello, this is Scott Wells for the magicwordpodcast.com. I have a friend of mine who I have not spoken to in so many years, and I am really excited. In fact, when we got on to chat for a little bit on Zoom, I kept saying, hold on, there's so much I do want to talk about, and I want to get the spontaneity of the moment into this podcast as we talk. This is someone who I have just been a fan of his for such a long time, and perhaps some of you were back in the day, and I say that was probably back in the 80s, 90s or so, and we're going to catch up with what he's doing and where he's been for a while. We're going to be talking with Steve Aldrich here today, and Steve was one of the leading members of the Foan Family Circus. That's the F-O-A-N, Foan Family Circus, and way back when, and I don't remember, we'll talk about this, what time it was, but they were on the cover of the Linking Ring as well. And I remember how they had blatantly sung a song on the cover of the Linking Ring and held up this thing, and they took a picture and they made the cover of the Linking Ring. But they had just a hilarious act, and it was a lot of fun. There was something that I did find over on the Ask Alexander page. I just want to read this, just a little excerpt of just one little short thing that they had done. It says, possibly the greatest bit of satire comedy was the 12 Days of Magic. It was a parody of the 12 Days of Christmas sung by the troupe, while the wizard would, dressed in red flannels, race through the magical props, as they were mentioned, brought screams of laughter from the crowd. Starting with the gift of a pocket finger guillotine, the parody progressed through the rest of the song with 2 Chinese sticks, 3 rubber bands, 4 fanning decks, 5 linking rings, etc. They were including zombies, color-changing Hanks, collapsible top hats, thumb tips, and a couple other props. The mayhem continued as the wizard progressed and in reverse order through the various items as they were mentioned with the song. Simple? Well, by the time he got to the 6th item, things were beginning to go awry, and he was racing to keep up. But he drew applause and laughter when he reached the end of the verse, the pocket finger guillotine, and demonstrated it each time on cue. And a laugh riot there was. The Foan Family Circus was a fictional one, supposedly dating back to the earliest of times, although always in showbiz, their forefathers came to this country to seek fame and fortune. They never say whether they had found either. But it was fun, and entertainment was of great value, and they're rich in both. The troupe was made up of Brent Warren, Cheeseman Spark, Sam Kent, Eddie Goldstein, Barrett Felker, Kathy DeFrancis, and my guest today, Steve Aldrich. All come from Boulder, Colorado, and the stage manager was George Campbell, and music by Kathy DeFrancis, and recording by Jamie Kibben, and the choreography by Susan Hadley. Well, there's a lot right there to kind of start to introduce this gentleman, to talk about some of those people and where they are and what they have done and all that, because they really were a part of magical history and an integral part of comedy and making us laugh back in the day, that were not just magicians, that were jugglers and had a lot of great bits and things that some people even do today, and they question perhaps, where did this originate? Well, they came from these guys way back when, and they were just such a lot of fun. In fact, Kathy DeFrancis had a single 45. Remember those, the little hole in the middle over there. That was called The Magic Song, and I've got that on my jukebox downstairs. So anyhow, it's great, and perhaps you might be able to find that someplace on YouTube then as well. But I've gone on enough about this. I just want to tell you I'm excited to introduce my guest today. Actually, I thought he was in Boulder, Colorado, but he's moved actually just outside of Yakima, Washington, and we'll talk a little bit about that then as well. Please welcome, here he is, Steve Aldrich. Hey there, Steve. How are you, buddy?
Scott, I'm doing great because I'm talking to you. To be reconnected after all these years is really a thrill. I think it's probably at least 35 years since we've spoken, so it's a pleasure to be here.
It's got to be. It's got to be. I remember getting up to Colorado area from time to time and getting to visit with you up there for a while. Did you work for a while in the magic shop then also?
Sam Kent had a magic shop in Boulder, and I worked for him off and on for 2 or 3 years. And then I went up and I worked at the Tower Restaurant in Snowmass. Mm-hmm. And I was doing bar magic there after Bob Sheets left. And then I couldn't find a place to live, so I moved back to Denver, and that's where I teamed up with Kathy. And then in those days, Doc Eason was a waiter. He had never done a trick in his life.
Well, now, wait a minute. I remember that Bob Sheets was working there, and I thought that Doc was there. I mean, I know he was there. You say as a waiter, but I thought perhaps he was doing bar magic as well as Bob. So Bob was only the guy. No one else was helping him.
Bob Sheets, and I think, let's see, Steve Spell joined him later.
Yeah.
Bob Sheets, and there was a guy named John Lonergan. And Lonergan was the guy who invited me to come up there, because after Sheets left the tower, he stayed in Aspen and he opened up the Jolly Jester. And so Lonergan was the only guy at the tower and he needed help. So he invited me to work there. I had worked as a bar magician in Taos Ski Valley, New Mexico.
Mm-hmm.
And so my magic was very successful, but I couldn't find a place to live. So I split from Aspen. And this guy who was just a waiter, and everybody called him Doc, he said, you know, I think I'm going to try some of this magic stuff. And I remember thinking, man, it's harder than you think, but have at it. And it was amazing. He would call me every time he was in Denver and try to get some secrets and some moves and so on. And he really applied himself. And of course, he's the success that he is today. But he did not do a single trick until he was in his at least mid-20s. And he just had to scrape it together by watching others and trying to, you know, learn what he could.
Right.
On the road. Learn as you earn.
So he'd been watching Bob Sheets and all these other guys, Lonergan and others, apparently, and you, and just kind of thought, I can do a few of these things. And he had a nice personality, I guess. And so it just seemed to be a nice fit.
He had the personality and he has a real, you know, jovial nature.
Yeah.
So as an entertainer, he really hit the mark. As far as sleight of hand goes, he didn't know a thing. He didn't know the imp bomb.
Yeah, that's pretty funny. Now, when you were doing that and you said you couldn't find a place to live, I could only imagine what the cost of living in Aspen would have been and still is. And I know that Doc lived over in Snowmass. Seemed like he lived nearby. He didn't actually live right there in the Aspen.
The tower
area.
is in Snowmass, right in the ski area.
There we go. Yes, sorry.
And I don't really know where Doc lived, but he eventually got his own place down in Carbondale. And the problem in Aspen is you can rent a place for like Christmas weekend and make huge money. Mm-hmm. And it's just much more profitable to rent your place out on a day-to-day basis. So monthly rentals for a local to live were essentially non-existent.
So you came back then to Denver, and then you said you'd met Kathy. Did you meet Kathy when you came back at that point?
I met her before I went to Aspen, and I was doing a show at the Children's Museum in Denver. Mm-hmm. And she saw my show, really enjoyed it. We got friendly. I liked her. She liked me. Mm-hmm. We started dating, and then I would do magic. And she was a tremendous promoter of me. She would introduce me to everybody and say, oh, you got to see this guy's magic. He's great. And then she started writing songs just with me in mind. And then I created magic to go along with her songs. And so the one you mentioned, the magic song, was our most famous piece. Mm-hmm. I worked out a coin manipulation routine where the coins would appear at my fingertips and vanish and fly into a glass. And part of the lyrics of that song, she sang, clinking silver, catch my ear, here it is, but it's not there. You tell me that it's sleight of hand, but I believe it's magic. And so as she was singing these words, I was duplicating what she described mm-hmm. with my magic on the stage. So it was the most artistic piece that I ever did in my magic career.
That's what I recall also, as far as the total Foan Family Circus, where each person had different acts and things that they had done. It seems like that was part of it, that you did that classical part with her singing to your performance.
Yeah, we always included the magic song.
Yeah.
And so it was sort of a Fred Capps piece, if you will.
Hmm.
And then the rest of what we did was usually mocking magic, inside jokes,
In comedy. Yeah.
zany, crazy stuff, and a lot of juggling and a lot of singing. We did a lot of original songs.
Yes.
And what happened was we had a four-person group, and it was Brent Warren and Cheeseman Spark, Kathy, and I. And we put together a very nice theatrical show in what you might call poverty theater. We didn't make any money, but we put on a completely original show. And it was for the public. It wasn't a bunch of inside jokes.
Mm-hmm.
So we went out to Joe Stevens Convention in Wichita, and Barrett Felker came with us just for the fun of it. He wasn't a magician, but he was one of the world's best jugglers.
Mm-hmm.
And Eddie Goldstein from Boulder and Sam Kent were there. And we asked Joe, can you find a room for us and we'll put on a show? And he said, sure. So he gave us a slot like 10 a.m. Sunday morning or something.
Yeah.
And so we put on our show, and Ali Bongo stopped in to see what is this all about. Well, he loved the show, and he started talking us up. And we didn't have any group. We were just a bunch of people from Colorado who had done this show. And so he talked us up, I presume, to Riesel Bordner from Abbott's.
Mm-hmm.
So Riesel called Joe Stevens and said, how do we get these guys? And Joe had Sam Kent's phone number. So he called Sam and he said, I've got a job for you. And so we had this four-person performing group, but Sam was the guy who got the gig. So he invited himself to join our group because he's the guy that Joe called.
Right.
And Barrett Felker had done his juggling in our show, and he was a tremendous hit because he was just so great. So Barrett joined our group, and we were thrilled to have him. And then Eddie jumped in. So we suddenly changed from 4 people to 7, and we had to come up with something for the Abbott's get together because they were going to give us a whole headlining slot on the big stage.
As I recall, that was like around 1980, wasn't it?
Yeah, I'd say about 79 or 80. The first time I was at the Magic Castle was in 1976, and I had been to the castle and came back to Colorado before I met Kathy.
Okay.
And I had worked down in Taos Ski Valley in 1974 and 75. So it would have been late 70s, 79, 80, something like that. So we had to put together a show for Abbott's. So we invented the name Foan Family Circus. We wrote some songs. We got some choreography. And it just wasn't that common for a magic act to come out starting with singing and dancing. And so we were an enormous hit because we were so different from anybody else. And most of our magic was done tongue in cheek. Like you said, the 12 days of magic was just this frenetic chaos. It was kind of like a Laurel and Hardy routine.
Yeah.
And it got faster and faster and faster. And this was Sam's claim to fame. This was the only piece that he did in the show, but he did an outstanding job. And we won the award for funniest routine.
Oh, it's the Senator Crandall Award for a comedy, I guess. Was that it?
The Senator Crandall Award.
Now, you had also done, as part of that, was the classic bit of the Kuda Bucks thing with the towel wrapped around his head. Some people who are younger who are listening to, I know we have a wide variety of ages and backgrounds of people who are listening to the podcast, but that was one of my favorite pieces. Can you explain that first, who Kuda Bucks was and that particular routine and kind of how it evolved and what happened to it and who used it?
Yeah, I'd love to talk about that because Kuda deserves to be remembered. He was from Pakistan, and he was known as the man with the X-ray eyes. And I think he did all kinds of magic over his life, but his most famous piece was his blindfold act. And he did not do the standard thing where you scotch tape coins to your eyes and then look down your nose. He had a bowl of basically pie dough, water and flour mixed together to make a paste.
Mm-hmm.
And he would get 2 volunteers from the audience, and they would shove that pie dough in his eye sockets and completely seal the eye. You just could not believe that there was any possibility that he could get even a glimpse of light.
Right.
Then over this dough, he would put a large, thick bandage. And this was like a bandage you might use for a gunshot wound. It was like 4 inches wide, half inch thick, a foot long. He'd wrap that around his head. And then he would, the audience volunteers would put all this stuff on his face, and they would wrap his head up in essentially towels. So when he was done, his head looked like an enormous turban.
Yeah.
And yet he could see and do a tremendous blindfold routine.
I saw him performing at the Magic Castle one time. I know exactly what you're talking about, but that's why I wanted you to go in the detail you did, because as I recall, things that he would do, there'd be a blackboard and someone would write or just scribble some sort of a picture or whatever, and then he would come over and he would trace right over that particular chalk mark.
Yes. The very first time I was at the Magic Castle, I got to see Cuda.
Yeah.
And my dad was one of the audience volunteers.
Wow.
And so when a person came up to write, if they wrote, I see a dog, and they did it with printing, Cuda would replicate what they wrote with the same writing style. And I remember this woman wrote a big symbol on the blackboard, and Cuda looked at it with his X-ray eyes. He said, "This is the symbol of the Holy Om." And then he outlined it. And so he could reproduce any writing because he could see through this blindfold. And as far as I know, the secret has never been revealed.
No.
Jerry Andrus told me, he said, "Steve, if you look at where you know he has to be seeing and draw an imaginary line back to his eye, you'll see how he did it." And Scott, I did a whole week at the Magic Castle with Cuda on the stage of the Palace of Mystery. So I got to watch him 2 times a night for a week. So I probably saw that routine 25 times over my lifetime. And I honestly, I don't have a clue. And have you ever heard of anybody who claimed to know the secret?
No, I have not. That's why I'm saying it. I know it has not been published any place, to my knowledge, and I have not talked with all the mentalist friends I have, Banachek being my business partner, and other people. No, I don't think anyone has ever figured out how he did what he did.
I figured if anybody knew, it must have been Max Maven. And I only asked him about it a couple times, and he either didn't know or wouldn't say.
Yeah.
I got to admit, one time I was backstage during that week when I was working with Cuda, and I was fooling around backstage, and all of his props were piled up on a table.
Yeah.
And I had too much respect to just dig through it.
Yeah.
But I was too tempted to completely resist. So I walked over by the table, and without touching anything, I just looked at it, and I knew that if there was anything to find, he wouldn't have left everything out on the table. And it was just, I mean, for the listeners to the podcast, I can tell you, Scott and I have seen every trick in the world. And when you see a trick 20, 25 times, you finally start to catch on. And
you should.
Man, I never caught on.
Wow.
But our routine was a joke on Cuda. We all knew him, and he was friendly with us. And everybody in the world of magic knew Cuda at this time. And so after he got the blindfold on, it was more than just a turban. It was like his head was completely enveloped in these big towels. I think they were large linen dinner napkins, but his head was like an enormous ball of cloth. And so we came up with the idea that we would put the blindfold on Cuda. Eddie Goldstein came on, and he spoke with a Pakistani accent. He said, "My name is Cuda Foan. I will now show you something I learned since I was a child. It is an amazing demonstration." And so we got him all wrapped up, and we put the chalk in his hand, and now he's supposed to invite people up to write on the chalkboard, but instead he turns to the chalkboard and he just writes out, I can't, and he starts out to spell breathe, R-E-A-T-H, and then he falls over and he's passed out on the floor. Because people, when they saw Kuda in his blindfold, they would say, how does he breathe under that? So we did the I can't breathe gag, and that got an enormous laugh. Yeah. It was an inside joke, but everybody loved it. And it was so good that Johnny Thompson actually asked us if he could do the Kuda Bucks routine. So we said, sure, Johnny, have at it. And he paid us $1. And we said, there you go, do it anytime you want. And I found out on your podcast that he did the trick at least once. Mm-hmm. With Tom Mullica.
Right.
So it was popular enough that the great Johnny Thompson thought it was worth a laugh.
Indeed. Well, yeah, I just think some of our listeners would certainly enjoy the history of that, or those who have seen his act will appreciate it as well as those who haven't. I mean, I just think a lot of respect needs to go to some of these people who have made it classics, and people who are not perhaps as well known as, let's say, Harry Blackstone Sr. and Thurston and Keller and others, but there are people like Kuda Bucks who had a unique thing with the man with the X-ray eyes. That was amazing. That's true. Now, you had some other people, as I recall, there were so many things going on. Everybody loves jugglers. When you go to a magic convention, a juggler always seems to outshine all the others, and those are the ones who are remembered. So I'm sure when you had Eddie Felker to be a juggler, that people will remember. I remember another group that came through a little bit later, Air Jazz. Were you familiar with those guys?
Yeah, Air Jazz was made up of 3 Boulder jugglers, but Barrett Felker was not a member of Air Jazz. The number one guy who formed Air Jazz was Peter Davison, and he had won the top award at the International Jugglers Association convention. And then I believe Barrett Felker went back and won the number 1 slot at the IJA. And Barrett teamed up with a guy named Alan Jacobs, who also won the number 1 award at the IJA. So Barrett was absolutely top flight, very well respected in the juggling world. Cheeseman Spark and I, we were average jugglers, but we had some funny stuff. We would sing about vegetables and then juggle them and sing the song. There was one part, it's always such a treat to heave 2 carrots and a beet. They go through the air like singing, like streaming jets. All you see are the silhouettes. And they're also good to eat. The carrot, but not the beet. And then we'd take a bite out of the carrot, and then we'd sing our song, which was the Juggling Jubilee. So it wasn't exquisite juggling, but it was novelty. And Jay Marshall told me one time, he did a lot of puppetry and ventriloquism. When he went to a puppeteers convention, he would do magic. That way he would stand out from the crowd. And then when he went to a magician's convention, he would do ventriloquism.
Yeah.
So he would stand out from the crowd. So the jugglers always stand out at a magician's convention because they're not doing magic like everybody else is.
Right. That's really more of the novelty, I guess, something that is different from whatever the norm would be at whatever that convention is. You say in a juggler's convention that a magician would stand out. So something that is a novelty and different from the rest of what the attendees would see at that particular kind of a convention. Now, for some reason, I was thinking that Steve Spill was part of that.
Let me jump in here, if I may. I saw an act in Little Rock, Arkansas, and it was illusion, but it was a mime act, and it was Jack Hill and Graciela Banagi. And they went behind a screen, and they just did a mime act. And since it was 2 people, they would have like a leg sticking out one side of the screen, and then the head sticking out the other side. So it looked like an elongated human. It was much longer than the screen. And then the same thing, she would reach her hand up high, and he would reach his hand out to the right. And they created an illusion of an elastic person behind the screen. So without any thumb tips or magic gimmickry, they created visual illusions that were very powerful. And they were the most popular act at that convention.
Is that was part of the Foan Family Circus, or was that a separate act by
No,
itself?
that was an act that I saw
Oh.
in Arkansas, and it's just an example of you don't have to do much to stand out from the world of magic if you just tweak things a tiny bit rather than, following the instructions as they came in the package.
I see. That's true. I started to say that Steve Spill, I thought when you said you would work with him then at the Tower Bar and Grill out in Snowmass, he never worked with the Foan Family Circus. For some reason, I thought that he was one of or part of your group for a short time, but he was not.
No.
Okay.
Bob Sheets and J.C. Wagner and Steve Spill had their own place in Aspen called the Jolly Jester.
Mm-hmm.
And Bob opened that place up in downtown Aspen. And he had been up at the Tower restaurant, which is in Snowmass. Same place, it's just a ski area that's close by.
Right.
And so I was, if you want to say it, Bob Sheets' replacement while I was there.
Okay.
At the Tower.
Because he went over to the Jolly Jester in the area, basically. Now, of course, that was well before they had moved out to the East Coast and opened up what was that called? At Chevy Chase.
I think they continued to use Brook Farm Inn.
Brook Farm, that's it.
Brook Farm Inn, and I don't know if they continued to use the name Jolly Jester or not. But Eddie Goldstein, who was in the Foan Family Circus, Bob invited him to come out and work at the Brook Farm Inn. And Eddie was a school teacher. He's a great mathematician. And to this day, he is still using magic to produce science material for the public. But he always wanted to be a professional magician, but he was afraid of doing freelancing.
Yeah.
He liked the idea of having a steady job. So when Bob offered him a steady job where he could go and be on stage every day, every week with a known, a predictable outcome, he jumped on the chance. So he left Colorado and went to work with Bob. And when he came back to Colorado, oh man, he was a master performer because he had learned under the tutelage of Bob Sheets.
And then also just performing, having plenty of flight time and going out and doing this night after night and everything. I'm sure that helped then a lot, as you say, then having learned from Bob and others who were out there. Now, when he came back, did he continue then as a professional and find some success, or did he go back into teaching?
Well, what he did was he worked for the Science Museum. And so he became the director of public outreach programs where they would maybe have a telescope and he would dress up like Galileo and talk about the history of astronomy. One of the programs he produced was about exploration of Mars, and they set up a simulation of the Mars environment. And so he didn't always do magic, but he included magic very often. One time he had a bed of nails and he hired a local magician to come in and lie down on the bed of nails. And then they would explain that your weight is distributed across all the different nails evenly, therefore no individual nail has enough pressure to penetrate your skin. And so he would do all kinds of magic in his programs when it was appropriate.
Right. Now, when you started out, we were talking earlier about being in Boulder, and when the Foan Family Circus had come about, everyone, I guess, congregated in the Denver area. Did you guys live in I always envisioned you guys living in a commune or close to each other where you can actually work on these different ideas. It's like, oh, I got this idea, whatever. And they go all day and night with different things from writing music and different bits and scripts.
I lived in Boulder because I worked for Sam Kent. He had a magic shop. And Eddie and I were inseparable in those days. I virtually lived at his apartment, but that's just because I was always hanging out there. And then when I lived in Denver, Kathy and I actually shared a house. And Spark lived across town, and Brent Warren lived way up in Netherlands. So it was a long drive for him to come down and join the show. So we never had that commune situation But one time, all 7 of us were hired to perform at the IBM convention in Houston.
Mm-hmm.
And we didn't get paid a lot of money, so we only rented one hotel room. So all 7 of us were packed in there.
Funny.
And Barrett Felker, there was no place for him to lie down, so he slept in the bathroom with his feet sticking out the door.
That is funny. I now remember that. I want to say that was about 1978 or so, I think, in Houston. That was the one and only time the IBM National Convention was here in Houston. And there was, what I remember most about that was there was a death. There was someone who had gotten murdered coming back
Yeah, it was a magician from Germany, and he was held up on the street, and the robber, the mugger, apparently had a gun. And so the German guy didn't really know what to do. So to try to, to try to protect himself, he pretended like he didn't speak English, and he feigned ignorance, thinking maybe if he just said, "Oh, ich kann du nicht verstehen, was willst du haben?" He thought that would de-escalate the situation, and apparently it aggravated the mugger, and he shot the guy. And so the poor guy came all the way from Germany to see some magic, and that was the end of his life.
That's right. And what I recall also, he was walking back with his fiance or girlfriend at the time, and I think the problem was that I don't remember the passport situation, but something about that she couldn't get back to Germany because he had the papers that she needed. I mean, things have changed obviously now, and it's a lot different, but for some reason she was held up here in the States as far as being questioned or something, couldn't get back to Germany for some time. There was some difficult, anyhow. Yeah, that was a very unfortunate turn of events, and nothing has happened like that before nor since, nor at any convention as far as a murder, well, that I've heard of someone dying at a convention, except for that was very unique. And obviously things have changed, and we hope that perhaps we'll bring the IBM convention back to Houston again, because that was almost 50 years ago, 45 years ago or so. Wow, boy, time.
Our conventions are almost always just a source of enjoyment and joy
and fun
for everyone. And we don't really experience a lot of crime in the magic community.
No. And now when you were performing then also, it seemed that your main venue was conventions in which you were performing, and you said you had a lot of inside jokes and things, but you also then performed for the public in the Denver area. So how did you sell tickets, or do you remember about how things might have been different then than now? Or do you think that if you still had that thing together, you could market this?
Well, the Foan Family Circus came together just by serendipity, because Joe Stevens called Sam, and we had done the 12 Days of Magic routine at a local Magicians Club meeting. And I never thought the routine was that good. I thought that everybody laughed because they knew us and we were local guys, and they liked it. But Sam really believed in that routine, and he wanted to do it. He wanted to join up with us. And so I was reluctant to increase the size of our group. So if I were to do anything like that today, I would definitely want to have a smaller, more compact unit. But because it was done by magicians for magicians, we got work at, probably 7 or 8 conventions. And that's the only place where the Foan Family Circus actually performed. Otherwise, Kathy and I would do shows, just the 2 of us, and the 4 of us. The name of our group was Parataki Ori, and we did shows in theaters and nightclubs, bank parking lots, the typical thing where we would just customize the show to whatever venue we were in. And we worked a bunch of places all over Denver. So we hit the big small time in Denver, and all of that magic was strictly for public consumption. We didn't do the coup de bucks routine anywhere except at magic conventions.
Gotcha. Yeah, I would think today that it would be a little bit more difficult to put a group together because after the conventions have seen an act and it's kind of gone through everything, unless that you got something completely new the next year, or it's kind of like, well, I've already seen them. So just like you need to see this group, it's really great. But after you've seen them, it's like, okay, I've seen that. And so they're looking for something new. I just think people have that short attention span, perhaps, and just like we want something that's the next new thing. So it'd have to continue to be feeding that shark as it's continuing to move, I guess. I'm just saying it'd be a little bit difficult when you also stop to think about how little the magic conventions would pay, and you would have a large group of people. And of course, the transportation and getting out there and everything would be eaten up by whatever fees that you're going to be getting. So it'd have to be something you'd be doing for the love of it. Certainly wouldn't be for profit, I would think.
Yeah, that's exactly right. We used up our material. We did have one come back to Abbott's, and we came up with as much new material as we could. And our second performance there was not as successful, mainly because of technical difficulties. Our first time at Abbott's, we used Stan Kramian's lights and sound equipment because he had it all set up for his show. And he just said, everybody gets to use my lights and sound. We had no idea that Abbott's did not own their own lights and sound. They had like a walkie-talkie and a spotlight. And I mean, it was primitive, and yet they had been putting magic conventions on for 40 years.
Right.
But their technical expertise was sadly lacking.
Yeah.
Now, when we did the show where with the song you talked about with the cover of the Linking Ring, that was just Kathy and I. And we got to perform with Jay Marshall, and we did a show. They called it the Magic Cabaret. And so they broke the audience up into small groups, and we did our show, I think, 4 or 5 times. So if you had a yellow ticket, you would come Saturday morning. If you had a red ticket, you'd come Saturday afternoon. If you had the blue ticket, you'd come Sunday morning. And so we got to do our show in a smaller venue, and I got to perform with Jay, which was the thrill of a lifetime, and also with a guy who did bubbles. He blew bubbles and created some.
Tom Noddy.
I
saw the show. I remember that.
Sculpture.
Yep.
And another guy on that show was Mike Marlin, who was a juggler.
Sure.
And may I tell you an anecdote from that?
Please do.
From that time?
Yes.
I don't know if you ever heard of, what is the guy's name? The guy who had the yacht.
That'd be John Calvert.
John Calvert. Okay, so we're doing our show with Mike Marlin, and he was a very charming, what you would call a hippie juggler.
Yeah.
And so we went to the big auditorium, and Mike was the MC. So we all go into the auditorium, and Mike comes out, and he's doing like a little warm up for the crowd.
Yeah.
And he starts juggling with scarves, and he's telling us a story. So he says, once there was a boy, and he throws up a blue scarf, and once there was a girl, and he throws up a pink, and they had a green Chevy, and he pulls out a green scarf, and he's juggling and telling a story. And he finishes, and we give him some applause, and he goes up to the mic and he says, okay, it's about time to get our show started. And all of a sudden he freezes. And he backs up to the curtain, and you can see him standing next to the curtain, and he's listening to somebody giving him a message from behind the curtain. And he says, yeah, okay. You really want me to do that, huh? Well, okay, if you say so. And he comes back to the microphone. And he says, all right, everybody, I want you to leave the auditorium. Now, there's no danger. It's not an emergency. The building's not on fire, but just go back out to the lobby and stand around for a while, and we'll let you know when it's time to come back in.
Okay.
So this is an auditorium, 600, 700, 800 people. I don't know, a great big theater. We all walk out in the lobby, stand around, look at each other and say, wonder what's going on. And so then we go back in the auditorium, the lights go out, and then you hear a voice that says, "Ladies and gentlemen, John Calvert." And Calvert comes out and does his act.
The cigarette manipulation down the aisle.
Yeah, which I thought was terrible, but that's another story. And so the show went on, and nobody could understand what had happened. But I was lucky enough to get the inside scoop from Mike the next day. Turns out that Mike is going out there doing his audience warm-up, and John Calvert is backstage, and he's saying, "Who's out there? Who's out there on the stage? Who is that person? What's he doing?" And the stage manager is saying, "Well, that's the MC, and he's doing a little warm-up to get the crowd rolling, and he's the MC for the show. He's getting the show started." And Calvert is saying, "Nobody gets on the stage before I do. Nobody announces me. I don't want any warm-up act. What's he doing out there? Get him off the stage." And the stage manager is saying, "Well, he's part of the show. He's the MC." And Calvert says, "No, he's not. Nobody does that. I want the lights to go dim, and I want an off-stage announcement that says, 'Ladies and gentlemen, John Calvert.' That's the only. If you don't do it my way, I'm leaving. I am not going to perform. I'm not going to put up with this." So he's just having a fit backstage.
Wow.
So when Mike Marlin backed up to the curtain, the stage manager is whispering to him, "Just tell everybody to leave."
And come back in and we'll start over.
Yeah. And so we left the auditorium. We came back in, the lights went down, and the offstage announcement said, "Ladies and gentlemen, John Calvert." And then he did his show.
Oh, man. I had never heard that before. That's a little bit of a prima donna there, but he had a show. Speaking of which, were you the one who said this joke? When he was performing, remember he had 3 volunteers, and he did cups and balls, basically, where he would put a ball, one of his balls in somebody's mouth, and then it would come out of somebody else's, or have 2 or whatever, or that he used the people as a cups, and then he had these little round balls. Do you remember that?
He did that trick in that show that night.
Yeah.
And that's the only thing I really remember about him, because that trick just disgusted me. He
putting
was
something in other people's mouths like that.
Yeah, he takes the ball out of his pocket, and he had it in his grimy hands, and he would make it vanish and then pull it out from behind your ear or whatever. And then he would just slap the spectator's face with an open palm. And you could tell he just shoved a ball in their mouth, because they had this quizzical look on their face.
Yeah.
And they weren't smiling, and he stage whispered to them, "Keep this ball in your mouth until I tell you." And then he would do it to the next person, and he would do it to the third person. And then he'd show his hands empty, and then he'd walk up to each person with his hand palm up, and they would spit the ball into his hand. And I think it's the most repulsive routine I ever saw in all my years in magic.
Yeah, I hadn't seen that before nor since. He was the only one who did that. And I thought that was you who had said to me, or some comment about, how this guy is the only way he can get away with shoving his balls in someone's mouth on stage or something.
Well, I don't remember making that quote.
Maybe that wasn't you. But
it sounds like me. Were you at that convention, and did you see it?
Yes, I did.
And do you remember the exit to the lobby?
I didn't know what was going on about that though either. So that clarifies something that was a mystery of life. The
secret is out after all these years.
That had to be, again, early 80s sometime. 81 to something.
Yeah, 81, 82, something like that. I have the linking ring here in my house, and they put us on our song was basically begging them or forcing them to put us on the cover of the linking ring. And it was a big inside joke with a lot of references to the professor and Bill and Irene Larson and all that. And so sure enough, we conned them into putting us on the cover of the magazine. But it was the IBM Golden Jubilee or something like that. It was the 50th anniversary of the International Brotherhood of Magicians.
Mm-hmm. Yep, that is true. I recall also there was when Di Vernon used to have his column in Genie magazine, he had said something about the Foan Family Circus as well, of saying how impressed that he was, and that if you ever get a chance to see them at a convention, you need to go to the convention just to see the Foan Family Circus because they're so entertaining. So I know he was one of your fans as well.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Well, that's news to me, but that's pleasant to find out.
Yes. Now, as far as that song goes, yeah, that was kind of blatant of saying, we're on the cover of the Linking Ring, and it was funny. It's like, almost, begging them to do that. And they did put that on the cover of the Linking Ring. And that was a parody.
Let me explain that for the listeners. There was a guy named, I think it was Dr. Hook.
Dr. Hook. Right.
And here in the United States, there's a famous magazine called Rolling Stone magazine. And so they did this song, I want to be on the cover of the Rolling Stone. I'm going to buy 5 copies for my mother.
Mm-hmm.
And, I just can't wait until I'm on the cover of the Rolling Stone. So we did a parody of that, and we did the cover of the Linking Ring. And all the lyrics were inside jokes. I remember part of it was, let's see, we know Bill and Princess Larson, and we've been on Johnny Carson. Joe and Martha Stevens know us well. We know Copperfield and Henning, Bruce Servan and Larry Jennings. We even got 4 stars from Ed Michel. So Ed Michel was like the guy who reviewed tricks in the Linking Ring magazine. And Bill Larson, of course, ran the Magic Castle. So we just did all this name dropping as if we were important people in the world of magic, because look at all the famous people that we know. And so then we said, the editor of the Linking Ring, his name was Howard Bauman. Mm-hmm. So we spoke to Howard Bauman. We said, that we're uncommon. We're as hot as any group you've ever seen. So with these enormous credits, we were hoping you would get us on the cover of your magazine. And Howard came up after the show and congratulated us. And then Kathy gave him a big kiss. And sure enough, that worked.
Well, you're leaving out an important part, and that is you had this thing that unrolled. It looked like the Linking Ring with a cutout where the picture would normally be with the logo across the top and everything. And you kind of took a smile, like, you take our picture here. And that was the picture on the cover, which was of the cover of the cover.
Yeah, we made a virtual, we put ourselves in a frame like a picture hanging on a wall. Yeah. As if it were the magazine cover.
Now, coming up with something like that, I know as a creator, sometimes things come to you and other times you have to toil over it, and it could take days, weeks, months, or years. In this particular case, when you were writing that, did you have a deadline saying, hey, we want to do this for this parlor show, and started it then? Or did it come pretty quickly? Or did Kathy come to you? Or how did that come about? What was your creative process, I guess?
Well, I can't recall too many details, but Joe Stephen called us up and said, Steve, I got a gig for you at the Jubilee convention. You're going to work with Jay Marshall. And so I talked to Kathy and I said, let's do our standard magic song, but let's do something original and clever, because everybody knows us from Foan Family Circus. And so that song, cover of the Rolling Stone, it just made sense, cover of the Linking Ring. So we sat together and probably worked out the lyrics over a period of maybe 2 days.
Wow.
And then, of course, the melody was already created from the original song, but everybody knew the song. So it was kind of like coming up with new lyrics to a popular song that people could tap their foot to. And we knew that it would be well received because the song was so well known by everybody across the United States. And then, of course, we knew that all those inside jokes, people would love to hear that.
Is that available like on YouTube or someplace as far as digital recording or audio of this somewhere?
No, there weren't iPhones in those days, nobody video recorded the show. And we don't have an audio recording. I just remember the lyrics, at least some of them. And the rest, you have to take my word for it.
Sure. That'd be something I think would be of interest, perhaps, if you could put that to music sometime, to actually go back and start to write down from your memory those lyrics you do recall, and maybe start to, as time passed, might start to remember to fill in some other things, or maybe talk with some other friends to see what they might remember, and then actually record that. I think it'd be a very easy, I say easy thing to do as far as uploading and putting that on YouTube or someplace.
I'll see what I can do on that. We do have some poor quality video from Wichita. And when Max Maven died, another routine we did was written just for Max Maven. And I guess we would call it the Max Maven song, or the Mentalist song. But we did a rock and roll number, and we dressed in black, and we put the ESP symbols on our back. So one of us would have plus sign, one of us would have three wavy lines.
Oh, yeah.
And then we did a rock and roll number with choreography, kind of like the Four Tops. And I have that on video, and I just edited it so I could show some people on a Zoom meeting. So I could upload that to YouTube, and then you could see the Max Maven.
So was that a parody song also based upon a popular tune of the day?
It was an original song, original lyrics.
Okay.
And it was, he's a good mentalist today, and he's not afraid to say, concentrate on your card. I'm great. I'm a star. I'm gonna find out what you're thinking, 'cause when I snap my fingers, I'm linking up to your brain. Trust me. So it was a bunch of stuff. Max would say things like, trust me.
Yeah.
I'm going to link to your brain. When I snap my fingers, you will name a number between 5 and 20, blah, blah. And Max never got to see the routine, but I did send him a cassette tape, and he wrote back and said, yeah, good job. I enjoyed that.
How nice. That's wonderful. Well, I know there were a lot of people, again, you say the 7 people who were part of the troupe, and you told me that Kathy DeFrancis had passed recently of cancer. Was that right?
She had Crohn's disease, and she just got weaker and weaker as the years went by. And so I'm going to say it was 4 years ago that she died.
Okay. And as to where they are now, what about some of the other people in the troupe?
Brent Warren still lives in Nederland, Colorado, still does magic, still does anything that's creative. He is the most talented Renaissance man of magic, because he can write stories and poems, write original songs, he plays music, and he's an amazing sculptor and oil painter. And so magic is almost a sideline.
Wow.
With Brent. And then Eddie still does the science outreach programs. Cheeseman Spark ended up going to San Francisco, where he worked as a lawyer, and then he started a recording company, Zip Records, and he lives in Holland now. And then Barrett Felker, as far as I know, is still juggling. He teamed up with Alan Jacobs, so they had a 2-person juggling act where both members of the group were national champions. And so they just, any place where there's a variety show, they would be there.
Like cruise ships and every place probably around the world.
Yeah. I don't know much about how many places they played, but they were the one and only, Barrett was the only guy from Foan Family Circus who ever visited me in Montana. So it was very exciting. He called me up and said, I'm coming through town. So we sat down and reminisced.
When did you go to Montana?
Oh, I went there in, I think it was 1998.
Okay.
And I started working as a software engineer, and I didn't expect to do any magic. And then I ended up getting the best magic job of my life, which was at a dude ranch. And they had a winter program and a summer program. So during the summer, I would work outdoors in a cowboy outfit on a wooden sidewalk. It was kind of like Dodge City. And they had a general store and a jail and all these different buildings. And these were facades. When you went inside the building, it was the hotel room where the guests would stay.
Oh, I see.
So during the summer months, I did essentially street magic in Western garb for a bunch of people out on this dude ranch. And oh man, they ate it up. And then in the winter, they had a great big barn they called a livery. And it was just like a livery stable, but they didn't actually have horses in there. It was clean with tables and chairs. And I would walk from table to table and do close-up magic. And it was the greatest thing because I knew what was going to be on the table. I knew what kind of napkins they were going to use. So I had a glorpy made with their kind of napkin. And they had a lamp, like what do you call it? A kerosene lamp in the center of the table. And so, you know, the Gate and Bloom trick where you tear the corner of the card off.
Yes.
And you can make it match.
Right.
And you can mail the torn card to somebody 2 continents away. I would have a torn 8 of spades under the lamp on, you know, row 3, column 2. That table would have the torn 8 of spades under the lamp. Mm-hmm. And so I had the whole environment set up with all kinds of tricky surprises. And then I would walk through the table and make it look like, well, I just happened to pick up this napkin and I just happened to shove this fork through it. And then I just happened to find this under my hat. But I had that whole livery preset for my show.
Now, was Kathy DeFrancis living with you at the time then too?
No, we split up in Colorado and I moved to Colorado Springs. I ended up getting married to Kathy's cousin, whose name was Christine. And I kept in touch with her because she started a booking agency, a talent agency, and she booked all of the comedians in Colorado. Mm-hmm. And so I worked at the comedy nightclub, the Comedy Works, and Kathy would book me and send me out on various gigs all across the state of Colorado. So I kept in touch with her over the years.
And then eventually you moved up to Washington State.
Yeah, we were in Bozeman, and when the plague came, when the pandemic came,
right,
we were sitting looking at each other, and we said, "Let's get out of here," because Bozeman was getting too big, and we had passed through this region on a trip to Seattle, and there's all these apple orchards here, and I've always loved fruit trees. And as we were driving through, I said to my wife, who is Jasmine, I said, "Wouldn't you love to live here one day?" And she said, "Oh yeah, this really appeals to me." So when the pandemic came, we were just shut up in the house in Bozeman. There's nothing we could do. And we looked at each other and said, "What was the name of that town where we said we'd like to live there one day?" And so we looked it up on the internet and we found this house and the pictures just looked amazing. And we said, "What the hell? Let's get in the car and just drive out there tomorrow." Because it was on like realtor.com, you know, was the house. And so we just hopped in the car, drove out and said, "Look at this. You get a house, a barn, an orchard. This is Shangri-La. Let's sell our house in Bozeman and move here." And it was a quick, but nevertheless reasonably well thought out decision because it was consistent with our goals. And so we came out here, and I've been an apple farmer for 2 years now.
Now, owning the orchard, do you harvest those all yourself, or at a certain time of year you have some temporary people come and help? And do you sell these to grocery stores or a farmer's market, or how do you market your wares?
There's a fellow who owns a lot of acreage, and he has tractors and forklifts and all that. And so he leases the land. He doesn't actually pay us, but he takes care of everything and brings in people to pick. And they fill these enormous bins. It's about a cubic yard of apples per bin. And he trucks them away to a cold storage facility that's about 2 miles from here. And he takes care of all of it. And what I do is pick all the apples that I want. So I make apple juice, I make dried apples, I make pies. We also have cherries and plums and peaches, just a few of those. So we can peaches and we make cherry pies. And the rest of the time, our leasing agent handles the heavy work.
It sounds like you have very little time then with all that work to do for magic. I guess you don't perform or do anything anymore with.
There is a local magicians club, I guess you'd say, and we've got about 5 participants, and we get together every other week. And so I work on a new trick for those guys. And then I have had 3 shows out here on the farm.
Mm-hmm.
And 2 of them, we had a huge crowd, and it was very successful. A nice sort of autumn, early September outdoor show. And oh man, they were spectacularly successful. But when I was a professional, I had my A material and I stuck with that. Mm-hmm. And I would go to lectures and I would see new tricks. And Scott, I took notes at the Magic at the Rockies convention.
Yeah.
I would always attend Magic in Rockies because I was the guy who started Magic in the Rockies.
In Fort Collins?
I started it up in Estes Park.
Estes Park, yeah.
But then they started doing it in Fort Collins. And so every year they would invite me to be the guest of honor. Mm-hmm. So I would drive down from Bozeman and I would attend the convention. And I took notes at different lecturers, like the guy from Vegas who did the trick with the funny hand, Kevin James. He did a lecture that was just tremendous. And David Regal was at convention. He showed some amazing tricks. And I have pages and pages of notes with, it says, do this trick. And then I've got 5 stars and 8 exclamation points. You must do this trick at the ranch. And then I would go back to Bozeman and I never did any of them.
You fall back to your normal A act, right?
I had spent a lifetime trying to acquire good stuff that worked for me.
Right.
So I am just not one of these guys with 1,000 books on the wall and 16 closets of material. But now that I'm an amateur and I hang out with the local guys, I dig up a new trick every couple of weeks so I can show these guys.
Well, that leads me then to actually conclude here with what I always like to ask my guests at the end, and that is the name of my podcast is called The Magic Word Podcast, because I like to know what is it that's your philosophy of life, as you've kind of lived such a full life and done so many things in magic and been professional now, kind of, as you say, an amateur. What is it that's important? I don't mean a word, but what is it that would be important to you?
I'm so glad you asked me this, because at that very same convention where John Calvert threw his fit, one of the old timers from the IBM went up on stage and he said, we love our conventions, and the great thing about it is all the friends that we see. Mm-hmm. And at the time I remember thinking, well, that's part of it, but really the big deal is to come and see great magic. But now looking back, I am in his camp completely. The reward of choosing magic as a lifestyle is the friends you make. Meeting people like the professor was very exciting for me, but meeting Kuda Bucks was one of the greatest experiences of my life. It's not everybody who gets to meet the man with x-ray eyes who walked over hot coals. And then you meet people like Tom Mullica and Brent Warren, and you make these lifelong bonds with people who share that appreciation of the illusions of magic. And I think what we appreciate is how magic made us feel when we were young and the tricks fooled us. Mm-hmm. Before we learned the secrets, we would see the magic milk pitcher or the torn and restored newspaper, and we would just gasp with amazement. And so what we bring to the public is that feeling of amazement. And what we get out of it is the reward of being in the community of magicians. And for me, it's the place where I belong.
So really, it sounds like friendship is very important to you, and what we have learned in people we have met, not just the experiences, but what you gain from the experiences are friends that are lifelong, like you and me.
Yeah. How many conventions have we gone to together? And we don't remember the tricks, but we sure remember that we shook hands. You said, "I'm Scott, I'm Steve." And every single time we would bump into each other in the lobby of the hotel, it was like, "There you are, buddy. I knew you'd be here. Great to see you again."
Well, it was good seeing you and good talking with you and catching up. And I know a lot of listeners have learned a lot. And those who didn't know much about the history have learned something new. And those who were part of this will now know some of the history behind that, like the John Calvert story and other things. This has been just a wonderful hour. Thank you very much. I appreciate your time, Steve.
Well, I hope the listeners get something out of it. I know I did. And what a great pleasure to be invited to talk with you today. Scott, I thank you from the bottom of my heart. It's great to see you again, buddy.
And you too. So for the Magic Word Podcast, that was Steve Aldrich. This is Scotty out. All right. Before we actually wrap this up, I do want to mention one more thing. After we were finished with our conversation, Steve said, well, if anybody's interested, by the way, in my lecture notes, I've got like a big, set of notes, like 60 or 70 pages or so that he's got available through Google Docs. And he'd be glad to send you a copy of that for absolutely free. And his email is right down here. If you will just follow that email address and contact him, he will send you a link to that you can download on Google Docs. And he has some stuff that has been hidden for a long time, some things he had held back, which he finally released in this particular set of notes. And it's absolutely free. But however, if you want to float him $3 or $4 for a cup of coffee or something, he said, I would appreciate that. And he can give you the details on how to pay him for that if you wish to reimburse him. But he's just such a great guy, and he's just willing to share. And it's something that, again, he's really not performing much anymore and doesn't have a lot of stuff to sell, or much, if anything at all, particularly. So this is something that he is offering then to you, the listener, for absolutely free of charge, and it is well worth your looking into. I highly recommend that you contact him, get the information on how that you can download this from Google Docs. Again, thank you very much, Steve Aldrich, and thank you, the listener, for tuning in to the Magic Word Podcast. Scotty out.